I always love talking to Fang, and I was knee deep in launching my membership site. It took 2 years to get it developed, but the last 6 months have been a lot of blood, sweat, and tears getting it up and going. So I had to kind of bow out of presentations. So it's fun to be back and to be presenting to y'all. And it's an important topic. I have actually been asked to speak about this topic for several organizations recently for a group of nutritionists, registered dietitians, to help them be better at negotiating their packages and their salaries and with the healthcare organizations and all. So it's kind of a different swing on it. But tonight I'm going to present, and then we'll leave some time for questions at the end. So feel free to, jot some questions down. I'll probably answer hopefully a lot coming through, but I'll be happy to stay on until about 7:45 or 6:45, and then I've got about 500 people will be waiting for me, so I'll pop over there. So let me get my slides open. And if you hear any noises in the back, I was describing that I have a brand new puppy, and he's usually really good, but then puppies and kids usually aren't good when you want them to be. So we'll see how this all works out, right? So this is about honing your negotiation skills. And as you'll see, as we go through here, I don't think of this only for compensation. We are negotiating. Lord knows you live in New York. You are negotiating all the time. How much is that banana, right? So we have all kinds of negotiations that we're doing. So I want you to think of it a little bit broader than normal. But what I most want you to do, my passion in teaching is to actually get people to learn and then do, because it's the action that activates the learning, right? So tonight, I don't just listen, don't just take notes, but block the time and take action, no matter how small, on things that I'm going to teach you. So even if it's one little thing and you put it on your schedule for tomorrow or over the weekend, and I'm going to spend a half hour on that, whatever it is, the point is when you listen to something and you take action sooner rather than later, you start to get results much quicker, right? And that's what it's all about, is for me, is results. Also, if you're listening and maybe you're saying, well, I'm not, negotiating, I don't have any offers, or I'm fully employed, I don't need to listen to this, but I'm here and I want to network, and that's all good. But I will tell you, think about how could this apply to me now? And I try to add a lot of information in here that makes it understandable to be applied more broadly anyways, right? But I do want to start with one ism of mine that came up when this was a presentation, was part of a 5-part series that I did on my Zoom calls. And I really, really want to urge you all to understand that the only way to get better at interviewing is to interview. Mock interviews don't do it. You're not as nervous enough. You're not sweating enough. There's not enough uncertainty, right? And of course, good interviewing leads to a job offer, which leads to honing your negotiation skills. So that's where we're going. But I really wanted to put this reminder in tonight. And that means that if you have landed, or when you land, that means that you take the recruiter's calls, you have the conversations, and you go through part of the interview process so that you don't get rusty. Because not only do you only get better by interviewing, but you lose it pretty quickly. It's sort of like your golf swing. You can lose it pretty quickly. So just a friendly reminder at the beginning of this series, right? And I want to explain to you something about my work and the Bulletproof advantage to interviewing when you're working. And this is my evangelical tour this year, is to get people to understand that just because you talk to a recruiter and you have a conversation, and maybe even talk to the first person at a company for a role, it doesn't mean you're not obligated. You're exploring, right? So that's all there is to it. So when you are, but the power of really understanding what I teach in the bulletproofing is when you're already employed and negotiating compensation, you have more leverage, right? They know that they've got to woo you along. They feel more in the catbird seat when that's not the case than they do when you are. I just worked with a client, and I've never seen a package like we wound up getting. But at the end of the day, it was because she was very gainfully employed and they wanted her desperately, and they kept coming back with more and more without even being asked, sort of, right? And then so when you do what I teach, you always have options lined up, and it makes you negotiate for everything more confidently, including any internal increase or internal promotion, because it's like, okay, if this is where we're going to settle up and I'm not going to get the compensation that I think I should be getting, then that's okay. But I now have choices because I've been interviewing, I've been bulletproofing, I'm lining up opportunities, and I can move on. So it's really an important piece. And I want you to understand that the number one cause of poor performance in an interview or when negotiating is failing to prepare your mindset. So I do laser calls, 15-minute, to come and tell me your biggest problem. And many times people will come and say, my biggest problem is interviewing. I keep getting, I get to the recruiter, I don't get past the recruiter. I get to the 3 finalists, I don't make it to the final. I get to be number 2, I don't make it to number 1. And guess what? By the fact that that's the way they're thinking, I already know it's going to continue to happen until they stop thinking that way, right? So when you think that something is the pattern, then you actually maintain the pattern, and it's all tied to your mindset, right? So you actually duplicate the pattern over and over again. That's really what's going on. So I want to start up front, because anybody who knows my work knows that my book started about mindset. My lectures usually start about mindset. It's the thing that really holds people back in so many ways. So while I'm going to teach you some skills in networking, in negotiating, I want you to understand that your ability to really be a great negotiator and be persuasive in anything is to really get your mindset straight, because that's how boats sink, from inside, from what's going on inside your mind, not from what's happening on the outside, right? And mindset drives your confidence, and your confidence drives your destiny. And if that is ever true, it's in interviewing and negotiating, because when you go in with a sort of the skills I'm going to teach you here, and you have that confidence that you're on the right track, it's going to make everything easier and smoother, no doubt about it. And the more you prepare, the more confident and calm you will be. So congratulations for being here tonight to hear about honing your negotiation skills, so you'll be more prepared and be more calm and be more in control. And that's the hope of it, right? So I want you to understand and get very clear on the impact of your mindset in this area of honing your skills in negotiations. Confidence, when you exude confidence, you make a better first impression, and you'll have more credibility. If you look weak on the other side, then if you're negotiating with somebody that wants to take advantage of you, they're going to see that. And when you're anxious, you'll be very unsure, and so will your answers, right? When you're both interviewing and negotiating, your nervousness can be interpreted as being unprepared or weak. Has nothing to do with that. You could have stayed and been 6 days honing all the answers you needed, but if you're not confident, it will make them almost hear your answers less powerfully, right? And when you're focused, when you have a focused mindset, you'll stay present and engaged during the discussions. And when you are negotiating, you want to listen for what they're saying, and you want to listen for every word of what they're saying, because there's usually some clues in the way that they're speaking and addressing, right? So that requires focus, and a calm mindset allows you to focus better. And then when this nervous voice inside your head distracts you with negative self-talk, you'll struggle to concentrate on what the interviewer or manager is saying. You'll miss important details and fail to answer questions effectively. And this is especially true. It's very interesting, because I just had a client reach out who I had coached, and she landed about 9 months ago, and she's got her boss is leaving, which happens pretty regularly these days. But the good news is they want her to go up for the job. And she reached out to me and she said, I have to rethink my mindset to think about this big move up inside of here. And I want to get my confidence up in order to do that. That's what needs to happen. And she said, I'm really afraid about what my self-talk in that situation. So we don't want any distractions. There's several book recommendations in here. Anybody who knows I read a lot of books, and I recommend a lot of books. This is a fairly new one. I'm a big fan of Michael Hyatt. He is the author of Living Forward, which I do a workshop on that every end of the year. This year I did it November and December. It was 6 weeks, I think. This is one of his newest books. It just came out a few months ago. It's actually in my book club, in my book in my membership, this is our first book of the quarterly book club. And I can tell you that if you want to better understand what will give you the confidence and the power that you're going to need to be really powerful in these negotiations, in any kind of negotiations, even negotiating with the CIO to get the support you need for something you want to do, it doesn't matter, right? That minding your mindset really helps you understand the way your brain works and why you think the way you do and how to actually have better control over that. So I really strongly recommend that and want to put that up front. Chris Voss is a very famous writer, wrote Never Split the Difference, but I love this quote, and it's, he who has learned to disagree without being disagreeable has discovered the most valuable secret of negotiation. I think that there's a lot of Hollywood versions of negotiations in your face and hard negotiations and all of that. And we see it in the discourse out there too much probably these days, right? But when we really think about it, really the secret is that win-win that is talked about in order to really get, because you can win the battle and lose the war very easily from negotiations where you're trying to be the conqueror, and then all of a sudden it's by the way, one of the reasons it's important to know, as a recruiter, I learned a lot about negotiations because when companies hire retained recruiters, they always, I think maybe one out of all of the searches I did in almost 2 decades, they have the recruiter do the negotiations. That is because they don't want any hard feelings between somebody who's going to report in 2, 3, 4 weeks to that job. And they want to keep that arm's distance. And it has to do with this, like, if they're going to be disagreeable, or if I'm going to be disagreeable, it's going to be between me and the recruiter. And then I would soften the edges and talk to the client and say, well, we're not getting too far on that point. However, right. And really soften it down. And it really is functions on this slide, the principles of that slide, right? So, but I want you to understand that honing your negotiation skills is not just for compensation discussions, right? Because if you really learn the principles of negotiations, you'll gain skills for your search, for your career, and for your life. So think of it much broader than just the dollars and cents, right? So let's talk about how you get to be great at negotiations. It starts by being authentic. Now, interestingly enough, this is also one of the ways I describe how you get to be really strong in an interview. The more authentic you are, the stronger you're going to be, right? So I want you to understand that your authentic self isn't fearful. It's when you go into an interview or negotiations behaving in a way that you think they want you to behave. That's when you lose your power. And your authentic self is the most powerful version of you. So going into a negotiation of any kind, and again, this can apply for the compensation before you land. It can apply for resources that you're negotiating after you land. It can apply for so many things. The more authentic you are, and don't try to be something that either you think that person is expecting you to be, or trying to be that hard-nosed negotiator when that's not your style, it's going to fail 100% of the time, right? So I want you to know, I believe very strongly in this concept altogether. My granddaughter is a big basketball player, and she's just starting high school, and she just found out she got picked for the varsity team, right? And she's been in this other team that she's been playing with as a AAU team, travel team. And it's really, really hard. And they play really, really hard, and they coach really, really hard. And she was very concerned as she started, and, was this the right environment for her? And how hard it was because of the way that they coached and ran it. And I said, it doesn't matter if this team gets you to be, for the high school team, or even if you ever get to a D1 school, which is her dream come true. It's who you will become in the process of having that goal is really the secret of it. My daughter did the Lake Placid Ironman years ago. And in order to train for it, she did the New York Marathon, which is the funniest thing in the world. Like, that's your training. But it was it wasn't all she cared about was finishing Lake Placid, whether she came in last and that, they were serving breakfast after the thing, didn't matter. It was just finishing. So when you hone your negotiation skills and you start learning this, it's who you're going to become in the process of honing this skill that's going to make an impact no matter what, right? So how do you achieve negotiation mastery? So going into any negotiation with that win-win mindset, right? Now, that doesn't mean that you both come in and you're right from the beginning. Here's everything we want. Oh, okay, well, this sounds great, right? It's not that. In the process of trading and horse trading, the thing is keeping in mind is, and you'll see more of this, but keep in mind, I want to give up something that person wants so I can get something I want. That's the way you want to be thinking, right? If anybody has ever negotiated and has a memory of it, it's been a long time for me, but when you're buying a house, like if you really want that house, you're going to be willing to give up a little bit to get it, right? So you have to know your objective. What do you want to achieve? What are your priorities and goals? Now you may say, okay, if I'm going into negotiations for compensation, I want the most money I can get. Maybe not. Maybe that really isn't the thing you should be asking for. And I'll show you things that you might think of differently. But you do want to say, so here's where this really comes in. If the objective is, I want this job, that's the first decision that you have to make. That's the first priority you set is, I want this role, and therefore I'm going to negotiate in a way that I end up with that role. And that's how you're looking at it, still with the goal of it's a win-win, right? And you prepare thoroughly. The thing that, the principle that I was taught years ago in some coaching that I did was this idea of always know what matters. Always know what matters to my audience. Always know what mattered to my employer. I worked under the lovely tutelage. I can't call it tutelage because he doesn't even have it in him, of a disruptive investor. Let's just call him that. Very well known. His actual name is Carl Icahn. I know what mattered to Carl. The only thing that mattered to Carl was money. The only thing that mattered to Carl was his money, as a matter of fact, nobody else's, right? But I knew that. So you do your research and you figure out what matters to this hiring manager, what matters to this company, what matters to this stakeholder as I'm trying to negotiate something in my role, what matters to my boss at this stage if I'm going for a promotion or a compensation increase. Know what matters and anticipate the objections and challenges, and really be prepared with not necessarily a script, but a point of view about that objection or that challenge that comes. Master active listening. It's really interesting. Active listening isn't just shutting up. That's a start. That gets you halfway there, but it's paying attention to what the other person's needs and concerns and priorities, and responding thoughtfully and with empathy. I don't believe I have this particular slide in this deck, but I have shared it in other decks on other topics. And it really is, I do a lot on listening and communication skills in my workshops. If the other person feels like you're trying to understand them, guess what? For the most part, with maybe an exception here or there, that person will start to try to understand you. But if they feel like you're not listening and you're not talking, but you're not hearing them, two different things, right? And they feel like you're not really understanding them, then they're not going to be in a frame of mind to care about understanding you. So that's a really important piece. And then just being articulate, concise and very, very clear, not a lot of, but this is important. And let me explain to you. It's like, no, just keep it the simpler, the better, always, right? And then so let me go back to that one. Take the two things that we as consumers get the most entangled in: buying a car and buying a house, right? And when the person that you're trying to buy the car or the house from starts talking about all these extraneous things, car dealers more so than anybody do this, right? You're just getting distracted, and it just throws everything right off. So think about, don't be that person, right? And then build rapport. So the more that you can start with I'm very big on understanding affinity points. So if you're going to go in and negotiate with somebody and you say, but I just saw, did I see something? You went to your son's graduation at NYU. My God, there were 23,000 people in that stadium. Wasn't that amazing? It's like, oh yeah, well, I know because my nephew was there, right? It's like, all of a sudden you're not a stranger. You have one affinity point, just one affinity point, whether it's a prior job, it's an interest, I have had a client who we put a big thing on his LinkedIn profile about motorcycle riding, because he was a motorcyclist and he took big trips. And he said, Pat, my interviews are all going overtime because every hiring manager that I seem to talk to, it was in IT, had a motorcycle, and he'd talk about the motorcycle for 20 minutes and then go, oh yeah, let's talk about the job. So it was, but by that time there was great rapport and a connection, and he was actually listening and trusting, right? So other ways of achieving mastery, which is manage your emotions. So good negotiators are sort of, kind of not get ruffled. If you want to be an ambassador for the United States, that's a real good quality. You can see some of that. Remaining calm and focused and very respectful, even if it starts to get a little, you always win if you're not elevating the emotion and they are, then you're already ahead. And then staying flexible, and we'll talk about some ways to be flexible in a little bit, but negotiating, it's dynamic process, right? So you're listening, if you're carefully listening, if you're being empathetic, and you're going to hear that they can't make a budge on here, but you feel that opening, well, maybe they can make a move over here, but that takes all of these other skills combined so that you can just say, I could adapt here and not feel like I've lost anything significant, right? And then focus on the process. So it's not just about the outcome, it's also about the process. And that's why I said, like, my clients wanted recruiters to do the negotiating so that if the process got a little testy, they didn't want that. But if your first line with the person who hired you and it's time to ask for a raise or in a promotion or something else in that relationship, or more budget, more support, whatever it is, you want to really focus on the process and make sure that you don't damage anything in the process, to be not just a great negotiator for that situation, but to be known as the best reputation you can have is to be a reasonable person. Because if you're known to be a reasonable person, the person who shows up to talk with you is going to be, their guard's going to be down. If you're known as a difficult person, their guard is going to be up, and you want it to be that manage the emotions and have both of your guards down. So having that reputation and that brand as a reasonable person. And for a CFO, I had reasonable and I had unreasonable CFOs when I was heading up sales. And those were very different discussions when I went in to talk about the compensation package for my salespeople, right? And I geared up differently for it, no doubt about it. Right? So also focus on interests, not positions. So and again, I'm going to show you later on what are some positions you might move on, right? So let me use this going back to what I said. If you've decided this is the job I want, this is the job I need to take today. I need this. I want this. This is the one. That's your position. My position is I want the job. So now I can focus on. My interest is I want the job. I don't want to focus just on, I'll only take the job if it's this compensation. It has to have this component, it has to have this dollar amount. That's a position that's untenable if you're going to be in a negotiation. So if you really say, my interest here is the job. Now, if it's the other way around, if it is my interest is I'm not going to take this job with these responsibilities without this compensation, then that's your interest, right? But decide what it is so you know how to take that position, what stance to be in, right? And then create value by finding ways to expand the pie and increase the potential benefits for both parties. So I'm going to, again, show you ways to increase the pie. This means looking for creative solutions that create new opportunities than just dividing up the pie that you thought you had, okay? And then follow up. So especially more so, usually in a compensation negotiation, they're following up with you. They're saying, we're going to talk with, I'll talk with my client. But even if I can tell you, I had a few really smart clients who did candidates that did this with me when I was in recruiting. I would do the negotiations and we would have the discussion and I would say, this is what the client is willing to do. And they would take point of view. And then I had to go back to the client and say, here's where we are. The good ones would send me a follow-up, say, I really appreciate your hearing me. I really appreciated your understanding what I'm asking for, understanding what I need. And I really appreciate you being willing to talk to your client and see if we can find a middle ground. Here again are some of the highlights of what we discussed. And then just what you're giving that recruiter, because if you're working with a recruiter, they're going to be the negotiator most of the time, as I mentioned. What you're giving them is the ammunition and the languaging to go back to the client, and you're helping them help you. It's a Jerry Maguire point of view, right? So what are the real benefits of mastering negotiation skills? In your career search, it gets beyond the comp. So this is the expanding the pie. So when negotiating the terms of your offer, by thinking beyond the comp, such as your start date, that can be a big benefit, and other benefits that could be bonus, more vacation, 4-day work week, 90, of course, today it's also hybrid. That's a big negotiation. I should add that, but I can't fit that in. 90-day mid-year review, stock, of course, and then foregoing insurance and converting it to cash. Every single one of those things that you see down there are things that I've worked with my clients to negotiate, including the 4-day work week with somebody who really wanted to hire this person. She really wanted the job, but the compensation, she said, Pat, it's like enough if I was working 4 days. And I said, well, tell them that's when you work. And they bought it. They said, yes, we'd rather have you for 4 days than anybody else for 5 days. And we think you'll get the job done. So we're done. Worked out perfect, right? So in interview preparations, here's a few ways that you can help during the interview process, right? Again, this active listening is so important because you're listening to the interviewer's questions and responding thoughtfully, and that will demonstrate your engagement and interest in the position, which is what they're trying to gauge along the way. It helps to building rapport, which we've talked about as being so important, and just getting that connection established, and then anticipating objections. So good negotiators are skilled at anticipating objections and preparing responses in advance. So same thing as you're going to do when you're getting down to the dollars and cents is during a job interview, it can be helpful to think about the potential objections. So in other words, that there is a particular requirement that they don't have as a must have, but as a nice to have. What can you offer up as an alternative? I'll give you a really good example of this. There's a person who was a member in the memberships group, and she has a master's in project management, which is rare, much less common than the PMP certification. And everybody posts everything and wants PMP certification. So by the way, another little chat GPT tip. I went into chat GPT and I said, what are the similarities and differences between those who have a master's of project management and those who have a PMP certification? And it gave perfect answers. And she was getting ready for an interview because she'd been struggling with this, and her way of handling it was not getting through, because a lot of people don't even know that there is such a thing as a master's in project management. So she anticipated they're going to go back to, we want the PMP, and she had really good argument against that with some really good facts. So was anticipating that, right? So in your career search, networking, when you're networking, so negotiation skills can be useful in a networking situation. So good negotiators are clear about their goals and their needs. And this is just as important as networking. So if you're honing your skills for negotiations by getting clear and concise and direct, those are going to serve you very well when you're networking, because they can help you more when you have defined your target companies and the role, and you're very, very crisp on that, similar to presenting your position in a negotiations. So this is honing, this is important. When your negotiations involves demonstrating your value to others, and this is important in networking as well. So you're articulating your skills and experience and accomplishments so you can show them what you have to offer, show others what you have to offer, and helps build that relationship and mutual benefit. And then collaboration. So good negotiators understand the importance of collaboration and working together to achieve their goals. And in networking situations, it's a fair exchange back and forth, and how you're going to mutually support each other, right? So if you choose to hone your negotiation skills, thinking about it more broadly in various situations, you can say, wait a minute, that makes sense. How will I use these newfound skills in my networking meetings, right? And then in your role, building coalitions. So be great at negotiations. You sometimes have to build coalitions to get what you want. So you bring to, like, honestly, if you can enroll the recruiter in the process, because there's usually one last fee at risk, or at being held back during the interview process. So in other words, the company, when the deal is signed, even on retained searches, a lot of times they have that one contingency of that last payment upon signature, right? So if you're enrolling them and say, look, the two of us want to get this deal done, what's it going to take for us to make that happen? What information can you give me that will help? So you're making it a team effort to get that deal done. And even if they've already been paid their fee, if they don't close, if you're the person that their client wants and they don't close it, there's nothing more desperate than that, because, just so you know, so this is where you're going to see you have a lot of power. If my client has said, I want Mary, that's the one, and then I can't resolve the negotiations with Mary, nobody else is going to be as good as Mary was. And I can come back with, how about candidate number 2? And they're not going to be as interested in candidate number 2. And in some instances, they may say, well, if I can't have Mary, I think we should start all over again. And that can happen. And even though they may have had their full fee for the recruiter, they now have their profitability of that search is going down every day that they have to go back out and source and do the work that they have to do for that. So there's a financial impact. So there you can build a coalition of, so in your role, it could be coalitions within organizations. So I've talked a lot about IT, getting the resources that you need from IT, getting the support that you need from human resources about something that has to do with the benefits packages, et cetera. But there's lots of ways that you want to build coalitions. Securing resources. So getting the really being able to hone in and say, with these resources, I can achieve this. Without them, we're going to be lagging here, and really bringing home the pain so that you're getting them enrolled. And then creating all kinds of internal partnerships within the organization so that you have that coalition and people to help you, right? Also in your role, overcoming resistance. So if you are driving change, learning to negotiate for some mitigation about, well, we wanted to do it this quickly, but I'm getting a lot of resistance. So maybe I'm going to rethink the timeline or reconfigure you're seeing a lot of this right now, again, with the return to office. There's a lot of negotiation skills being tested right now around this very topic, which is happening once you're in a role. Conflict resolution that's going on, not just between yourself, but being the mediator as well, and negotiating when two people have locked horns and you need them both to unlock and get their job done. Being really good at negotiation skills helps you to really get that resolved. And of course, with career advancement, and not just being able to promote yourself in a sense, or represent yourself for a promotion, but having good, well-honed negotiation skills, not just for the head of sales or the chief revenue officer, but for anyone, because they know that once you move up in the ranks, guess who's negotiating with the vendors? We don't have the purchasing department very much anymore. So you're the one negotiating with the vendors. And when they see that you have really good negotiation skills, it's also going to be, especially heading into the C-suite, while the board has a lot of control, there's a lot of negotiations that go on, especially when you're setting up the budget and the projections, et cetera. So they're looking for leaders that have good negotiation skills. And honing this skill is a true confidence builder, because success breeds success. So when you master negotiations, it leads to, a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction, and that increases your confidence. And by practice and experience, by honing your skills, this is a loop to always keep in mind. It applies to anything that you're trying to learn. So right now we're talking about it in terms of honing your skills. So you get a little bit of confidence, you get a little bit more, you stretch your neck out a little bit, you stretch out yourself, you get out of your comfort zone a little bit, your competence increases, even if it's just a minute amount. Then when your competence goes up and you know that you practice on a minor negotiation, maybe it's you practice on your teenager. Good luck with that, but maybe you do. It might be easier to negotiate with the CEO than it might be with your teenager. But if you're doing that and you win that battle, it gives you more confidence. And the next time you're going to try that again, right? This is a very scientific formula that works. And when you get really good at this, you're going to just, your confidence is going to elevate as you're going into meetings and discussions and conversations where you're trying to, come to good resolution. So it creates assertiveness and teaches you some self-advocacy, right? So when you get good at this, it's like, no, I know what I'm looking for. I know what I deserve, and I've got the skill to win this negotiations. That really helps you really be representing yourself. The getting outside the box and finding those win-win solutions really works with creative problem solving, and in many different ways. So anytime you're sort of at a loggerhead, you're able to step back when you have the skill and use those. And then just in building trust. So in the process of honing your skills, you'll get better at maintaining open communication, and that's going to build trust and increase your confidence, right? So couple of things to realize kind of thinking about, these are the values of it. These are some of the principles of it, which, in the beginning I said, hone in on those principles that I shared several slides back, so that you have that foundation that you use going forward in your negotiations. But I want you to know that the company comes to any compensation discussion, rather, looking at it with a business perspective, not an emotional perspective. And that gives them an immediate advantage. And you remember a few slides back, we talked about the emotional state that you come in. It is unbelievable. And I know how natural it is to have happen. But when it gets to the point where they're going to make an offer, too often I have people, they'll call up for a laser call then, and like, they're going to make an offer, and I don't know what I'm going to say. And they're all nervous. It's like, no, wait, that's not going to serve here, right? So really getting, whether you have to take deep breaths, whether you have to negotiate, learn to do a little mini meditation, but just in general, say, I'm going to go to any negotiation in a neutral tone, and I'm going to do what it takes to get there, because that's going to increase my ability to win that, to create a win-win solution from it, right? And here's what I want you to understand. You must have clarity. I'm a big believer in clarity about the fact that they have something you need, which is a role in their company. And you have something they need, which is the expertise needed to either solve their problem or capitalize on an opportunity. So in other words, the short version of this slide is, you must see it as a discussion of equals. They have something you need, you have something they need. And you know that you got this far, that they have identified you as the person who can solve their problem. They have that in the back of their mind. This person can solve my problem. Let's make the offer and get them in here sooner than later and get that problem solved, right? So when that's the case, this is going in, recognizing that helps you lower the emotional impact of it and say, no, this is a negotiation of equals. It's not them on the big side of the desk and me in the little chair on the other side of the desk, right? So what's going to help you in the final stages of negotiations or one of the hiring process, or even negotiating a raise or a promotion, is getting clear on your compensation range. So I shudder, and it may be the case for people on this call, if you are in a full-time search or in any kind of an active search, and you don't know what your needs are in terms of a compensation range, which could be a $50,000 range, right? So you could be saying, I'm looking for something in the 200 to 250 range. That's ideal, right? If you don't have that number decided and you're thinking, well, I'll wait and see what they offer, I'll wait and see what the market's doing. The market is all over the place. Big companies pay differently than small companies. Companies that really are starving for the talent and are located someplace where there isn't much talent pay better than those that feel like there's somebody on every corner. It varies. There's no validity to salary.com. There's zero truth to what's the other, Glassdoor. And I can tell you from years as a recruiter, I did a lot of CFO searches. I did a lot of VP controller searches, and the compensation was all over the place, even within the same industries, right? So it's not that you're just going to wait and see what they say. You want to be clear on where you're headed. This is something that will increase your confidence. And when they say, pay it. So first of all, when you're trying to decide your compensation, you want to pay attention to what your runway is, right? So your numbers people. So I put together a numbers chart for y'all. But this is, your pre-tax monthly impact of these compensation ranges. So, for every month you're giving up 16,666 plus a 401k matching plus insurance and all of that, right? So that probably comes up all stacked in, maybe 20 grand. And this is the difference when you're negotiating over a $10,000 or $15,000 difference. Remember, keep your priority, as we talked about earlier. Make sure you're focusing on what matters. And you're sitting there over 10,000 and they just say, we just can't, this is it. You're really giving up pre-tax impact, and as 833, and this is pretty general, but standard, might be a little bit less impact if you're living in a state like Texas or Florida and Tennessee, I think, and a couple others that don't have state tax. But is it worth walking away from the $20,000 a month for $752? It starts to make, just putting this down there, you kind of know in your brain, but I will tell you that I've had more people say, just seeing that chart reminded me of kind of, where I should be thinking about in terms of negotiations, right? But so here's the thing. When you think about being clear on your compensation range, what I know happens the most is anytime you're on a call with a recruiter or whoever's the first person you're talking to about a role, the question is, what are you looking for? What compensation range you're looking for, right? Now, in the state of New York, you're lucky because they have some rules and regs and they can't say, what are you currently making? It's actually against the law, and it's against the law in Massachusetts and California and several other states. But the typically it becomes this almost cat and mouse game, right? And it's useless because at the end of the day, they can't present a candidate to the client that they don't know that there's a likelihood that they're in the ballpark of what the client is thinking of, right? And I need you to know something up front. There were many times when I would say I remember vividly, I can still see her taking the job. I was doing a VP controller to be a successor to the CFO, and VP finance to be a successor to the CFO. And she, when I asked her what compensation, she was $20,000 above my client's target. But I also knew that she had everything that they wanted. It's like that house where, like, I didn't want to pay that much, but it had the pool and it had the garage and it had the workshop and it everything we needed. It was worth it. And so I said, you are higher than they're looking for, but I will, before we waste our time, I'll ask them if they're willing to have me continue to discuss. And I did, and they hired her, and they paid her the $20,000 extra that she had asked for, right? So it doesn't mean, I know that there's a lot of fear. If I give a number, they're going to box me in. They're just trying to find out, are you inside the ballpark or outside the ballpark? On either end, are you too low, which means maybe you haven't had the scope of control or responsibility that this position has, or are you too high? And they know the client's not going to get there. It might be a trip too far. I would suggest this. I'm a big believer in being, you can see me use the word mastery here. So whenever you're going to learn something, you might as well master it if you can. Not necessarily, I've given up on cooking for that. So I don't need to master that with Grubhub and everything else. So I'm done with that. But mastery in terms of this, and really, really getting good at this, and also responding differently so that you are more memorable. Because recruiters or hiring managers talk to a lot of people every day. How can you be more memorable? So when they say, what is your compensation range? What are you looking for in terms of compensation? You answer, I'm glad you asked. And they go, what? Never heard that from a candidate in my entire life, right? And then you say, if I prove to be a good match to this opportunity based on our discussion today, both of us are going to put a lot of time and effort into this process. So it's important to me that expectations line up. And then you give them your number. And what you're saying is, there's a lot to be done here. You also say it's going to depend, as I learn more about the opportunity, it's going to depend upon the scope of the responsibilities. It's going to depend upon what the expectations are. It's going to depend upon learning much more about the company and the role. But what's most important is, I'm happy to tell you this. Let's see if we line up, because I don't want to waste my time. I don't want to waste yours. And this is also the power of this statement is, you have just made yourself an equal, not an underling. It's not like, well, what are they looking for? What are they thinking? No, I got this. I'm looking for this. I'm hoping to be in that range or above. You can always have it say that way, depending upon the situation. But I'm going to tell you that you will be long remembered if you respond this way. Then most recruiters, it's so they ask the question and then they almost want to put themselves on mute, because they're saying, here we go again, we know what it's going to be. Well, what are they asking? And it's all this cat and mouse game. So I'm a very straightforward person. I can tell you that I've had lots of success with my clients using this approach, and you might try it on one just to give it a try. So here's the thing though, you can do all the research in the world about what you think the compensation is. And I think that a role of VP Finance, Controller, CEO, a CFO in this environment is here. But here's what it comes down to, is how they value the role and how you have demonstrated your value. So when some companies I find this a lot with roles where I see it a lot in marketing in smaller companies, because they don't value marketing. They think it's a waste of money. So they're going to spend as little as they can to get as much as they can, right? So in a smaller company, you can, even companies that same size, if the leadership has the feeling marketing is a necessary evil versus marketing's our big advantage, right? Two different things. One values it, one doesn't. The compensation is going to be positioned very differently, regardless of what you've researched, right? And then you need to be demonstrating the value that you bring, which is demonstrated by talking about your accomplishments, by what you did, how you did it, and why it mattered. Because I did this, and it has to be things that match up to, based on the job description and discussions, that what you did, how you did it, and why it matches up to the needs that they have, right? So when they are ready to make the offer is when you have the most power. And this goes back to that. The recruiter wants to get it closed, and the recruiter wants to deliver it to the client. And even if it's the client themselves, when they've decided, they've been through this process, if you think you're ready to just get done with it when you're in a job search, on the other side, you've hired people, I'm sure. You're just ready, let's get this wrapped up. I'm going on vacation next week. I want it signed, sealed, and delivered. I want them starting on July 2nd, and we'll be good. So they want to get it done just as much. That's when you actually have the most negotiation power, right? But the setup for the successful negotiation really starts long before the offer letter or increased discussion. It's building your case for your value, that what you have done matters, right? So you do that, you build your case during the interview process so that it is so compelling that they think this person's, the idea is that subconsciously there's a voice saying, this person will pay for themselves in the first 6 months if we can really get them in here and they can do here what they've done in other companies. So there's value in being able to solve the problem that they have. There's tremendous value if you have demonstrated that you've been able to increase productivity. Increasing, if it's medical, patient and client satisfaction, those have dollar values. So those accomplishments equate to the value that you have brought to other organizations. Knowing your industry inside and out, which means hit the ground running. They know all the nuances, and on and on and on. So you want to think about what is the value that I bring based on the experience that I have and the track record that I have that's going to really add value, but it has to be value that matters to them, right? So if they already have high client satisfaction, or they aren't even measuring it, sadly, then all those accomplishments don't have any value to them, right? When I was in sales leadership, my claim to fame was I was the turnaround queen. I loved to get a sales organization that was ready to be sent to the island of the misfits. That was my favorite thing in the whole world. And to turn them around, it's like a coach, who gets the team in last place, and you only got one place to go but up, right? So you're going. And that was always the way I felt. I did not do well presenting my value proposition, a turnaround, to a company that didn't have a turnaround sales organization, that had a bunch of good salespeople and just needed better leadership. It was of no value to them, right? So really, when you're talking to recruiters and trying to get, or anybody, I keep using recruiters, it could be an internal person, whoever's in this process with you, if you have any kind of a networking contact that is giving you insights, or if you have any kind of an internal recruiter or someone that's just helping you, these are things, what do you think really matters to them? What problems are they really trying to solve? And do they value my knowledge of the industry? Questions like that will help you so that when you're going to negotiations, into the interview where you're going to emphasize, and in negotiations, you want to try to have it be, so in other words, if you have a problem that they can solve. So let's say that the problem is we have massive turnover in our accounting staff, and it is causing delays in our monthly close. The board's just going crazy. The bank is beating us up because they don't have the numbers that they need when they need it. It's really a problem. So now you're in negotiations and you're saying, look, if we can get this started, we could change the way the closing looks really quickly. And you wouldn't have to be explaining to the board why it's not done. You wouldn't have to be waiting for your numbers. If we can get this over with, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's worth something. Let's get this deal done, right? So that's an example of demonstrating the value and being really ready to sort of, it's really harnessing the pain that there is, or it could be being able to seize upon an opportunity that they have, right? Either way, what you want to be able to do is have it that you've really built your case throughout the interview process, and then you can hone it again when you're talking, doing the negotiations for the compensation. And you really need to know what really matters to you, and you need to keep the big picture in mind and approach the salary negotiations as a collaborator. That's why I give you this chart here, so that you really know, what's at stake, right? You know what matters. If this is it, I'm done. I want to be employed and that behind me, and move on. Then you need to know that and have that big picture, that I'm not going to sacrifice. I'm not going to hold out if we're stalemated and there's $5,000 or $10,000 on the line. I'm not going to hold out for $400 or $700 a month, right? I can tell you how many clients would say to me when we got down to the final and we were like that $5,000 or $10,000 away. I mean, it was almost like I could have written the script for them and handed it to them, because they would look at me and go, look, we're not going to lose a great candidate for $5,000. Let's just do it and get it over with. Many a time I heard that, right? So one of the best negotiation tactics that I have taught my clients and use is when they come to you and they're off on the opportunity. So you have said that you're looking for a 225 to 250. I'm making this up now. And they come in with 215, 220, something less than. For many reasons, I was a psychology major, so that's probably why I happened upon this approach. Saying, let's try to close the gap is a very elegant way of saying, you're not offering me enough, but I want to be with you. Let's you and I close this gap. And this approach puts you on the same side of the table and shows empathy, because then you say, there's a gap between us, between your offer and where I shared my compensation target was, or what was being discussed, et cetera. I can't begin to understand the complexities you might have on your side, but I'm hoping there's a way we can close the gap. So now you're saying, look, that what you're alluding to, and you can go on to explain, like, I know you may have salary caps on this level. You may have compensation issues for somebody else in, peers. I know that there can be complexities at this point for you, especially on the salary, but let's see if we can find a way to close the gap. Now, interestingly enough, I have tested this with my clients, both from trying to say, period. So like, sort of then be quiet. Not like, could we do this or would we do that? But just to say that, and had the, some discussion. But at the end of the day, the person saying, I'm going to go back. Let's see what we can do to see. I don't know what we can do, but let's see what we can do to close the gap. I had one person came back and without saying anything more than close the gap, they wanted this person. It was in data analytics. It was about 5 years ago. They were scarcer than hen's teeth. And this was their growth frontier. And they clearly wanted to get it one and done. And they came back with a 6-figure signing bonus by just saying, can we close the gap? Now, that was a one-off in my life as a recruiter, as a coach, but it can happen. And that was all we did. Now, you can also have some suggestions. So here are some ways to close the gap. And you saw them alluded to them earlier. This is the making the pie bigger. You can get sign-on bonus, more vacation, the 4-day work week or hybrid or more flexible work arrangements of some sort, a 90-day review, a mid-year review. So I use that as a recruiter when my client was like being especially nitpicky about the bonus structure, and like they wouldn't go up a percentage, and the person was saying, look, I always had a 30% bonus, you're offering 20. We set up a 90-day review and said, okay, well, we're going to look at this again in 90 days or mid-year, depending upon the position and where they were looking at. And we set some criteria. And if you're meeting these goals and objectives in that time, then we'll be willing to, in the offer letter, be willing to reevaluate the bonus offer. It didn't, very seldom were they able to just say it'll go from 25 to 30, but that they would be open to negotiate it. At the end of the day, if they're feeling good about you and you've reached those objectives, it's not going to be an arm twisting at that point for the most part, if it's a decent company, right? And then in your role, being valued isn't about doing the work. It's about doing the work that matters to them and making sure they know the impact. So when we're talking about value in the negotiations process, we're talking about showing the value of what you've done and how that's going to translate. But when you're in your role, and I talk about this in my TED Talk. So if you're on the call and haven't listened to my TED Talk, it's short, like 14 something minutes, I think. This is where we often see people are doing great work and doing work that matters and not taking credit for it, not taking credit for the impact of it, right? And that doesn't mean shouting from the rooftops and being egocentric, but if you over time, if you start in a role and you have promotion ambitions and or compensation increase ambitions, then you want to figure out not what should had people come to me for coaching and things hadn't worked out in their last job. And it turned out that they were doing a lot of really great, interesting work, but it didn't matter. They weren't doing the work that their person who they reported to really wanted them to have. So that's important. So know in your role that what matters, make sure that they know that you're doing the work that's impact. Okay. So just a quick summary, and then I have some resources and then we'll open it up for questions, but you have to prepare your mindset first. Don't skip that. Don't think, yeah. Okay. But what about the real meat and potatoes? Mastering negotiation serves all aspects of your life. Authenticity wins every time, and it saves you from making a mistake. Leave your emotions out of the discussion and know your anticipated compensation range, and your compensation is ultimately about proving that you can or are delivering the value that they want. That's what that's going to correlate to. Okay. So you've got some of the principles back there to reference back. So Joyce, I'm going to go on and just show a couple more things, but for some reason that link wasn't copying, but I'll try it again as we go into Q&A. But I'll make sure one way or the other you get the slides. Negotiation is not an act of battle. It's a process of discovery. The goal is to uncover as much information as possible. So remember back there, we're talking about asking questions and really understanding what matters. And John Kennedy, let us never negotiate out of fear. I wish I could say it the way that he can, but let us never fear to negotiate. And then there's some additional resources that I've curated for you here. You can negotiate anything. Chris Voss's book is okay. I have found it can be a little, I don't know, it may resonate with you. It's a very well-read book, and it's very famous. I just picked out some other more neutral ones. This You Can Negotiate Anything is it's definitely a classic. And let's see, these are some videos about negotiating. that are TED Talks and things like that. You may say, what are we talking about with Amy Cuddy? I reference her a lot. Amy Cuddy is her YouTube video, or her rather TED Talk here, is tremendous. This is a must read in terms of presence, because part of negotiations is that confidence and your presence in the negotiations, and that leaving the emotions out. And I think it's a good crash course for that. It takes a little grit to get mastery of anything, and it takes a little bit of grit to really be great at this topic. Because again, I want you to hone the skills for a much broader thing than just, okay, I get my compensation. So this is what gritty means. To be gritty is to keep putting one foot in front of the other. To be gritty is to hold fast to an interesting and purposeful goal. To be gritty is to invest day after week after year in challenging practices. To be gritty is to fall down 7 times and rise up 8. And sometimes in negotiations, that's exactly what you're doing. This is the Amy Cuddy video there. These are a couple of other things that are more around interviewing. This one, I will tell you, if you're ever in the last one, Sean Acor, if you are ever just not in a good mood, or you just want a belly laugh, he's got great work. It's serious work, and it's a great time to read it, because he talks about or listen to it, summer camp. And that may say summer camp and negotiation. What are you talking about? Or interviewing? It's really about work. It's a TED Talk, and it is hysterical and meaningful. And then just, when you're thinking about value, you want to think about your self-worth. So Brene Brown's classic, The Gifts of Imperfection, and what do you say when you talk to yourself, which is usually needs a lot of help. And then TED Talks about self-worth and owning your value. And then TED Talks on imposter syndrome and confidence, which will all help. And these are mindset resources. So I just gave you a boatload here of really great stuff. Here's your summer reading list, right? And some mindset videos. This is a video that I watch every single day. I think it's been many years since I discovered it. And it's 6 minutes and maybe 12 seconds. And it sets me up for the day, every day. This is a really good Inky. His nickname was Inky. Maybe some of you know, if you're a football fan, he's from Georgia. But Controlling the Controllables, which is an impact of negotiations. So those are both good. And then I have my standard 23 reminders for every presentation that I do, which is make the question of the year, how can I get this done and make it be easy? I asked that question when I wanted to get a new puppy, and I said, I know, I'll get one already trained. And that's what I did. So that worked, right? And then my reminder for you, my reminder message of the year is, please get out of your find your uncomfort zone, rather. So instead of thinking about getting out of your uncomfort, go find where you're a little bit uncomfortable, and that may be in negotiations. Some other imposter syndrome and confidence videos. And then, yes, I have a new membership site that I have. Basically, it is full of worksheets and guides. I do trainings in there like this, but by very well structured for you. We do a weekly live call. We call it office hours. Once a month, I do a resume reviews of folks. So we have different things designated for the month. They're not just all Q&A. And once a quarter, we actually do breakout sessions and book discussion for the book of the quarter. So we launched it in May 1st, and I purposely limited it to 50 founding members to make sure that we tested the technology and everything. And so far it's so good, and they're loving it, and they're in there for the month of June, and it's all doing very well. So I'm going to be announcing it in July. And so if you want me to be sure, if you're on my list, you should get the information. But if you just want to be sure, just send an email to support@bulletproofyourcareermembership.com, and I'll be happy to answer that. And that's just some information on my other after you've landed information. So I'm here until at least 6:45 and open for questions. Anything I can answer, I'll try to get that link set.
Please feel free to unmute yourself and just ask a question.
Hi, Pat. I have a question. Thank you so. Oh, I'm sorry. Pat, hi. I have a question. Thank you so much for the presentation. So let's say the job is offering $250,000, and let's say you won $300,000. Do you go in with asking for $325,000, and therefore you have like a little bit more of a negotiating room, or do you just go in with a $300,000 and then realize that they're probably going to come somewhere in between?
Yeah, I wouldn't ever give one number. I just wouldn't ever give one number. It's such a backstop, right? So if you're looking for 325, you'd be saying, I'm looking for something between 300 and 350. If they come in and they say, well, our cap is 300. Well, I'm looking for between 300 and 350. And here's the thing, without thinking about the mastery and the information in the slides, you just think, well, we got this $25,000 gap. You close that gap by establishing your value. If that's where you're starting from, you make them, think about the agents who represent, pitchers and football players and athletes personally, right? What do? They go, well, if you get this guy, your ticket sales are going to go up. I am a big basketball fan because my granddaughter, and if you don't know the name Aaliyah Boston, she was the she was the first draft. She's rookie of the year. Indiana is sold out. Indiana couldn't give their tickets away. I bought tickets for when she comes to Atlanta preseason, and now I couldn't get a ticket if I wanted to. And the
so make your worth. That's what you're basically saying. But the thing is, let's say if they already said that this is what the salary is paying, $250, and we know it's low. We know that you're seasoned. We know that you have X amount of years. They've already pitched that right before you even started talking to them, or maybe right when you started talking with them. They've already put their stake in the ground. How do you say, I want 325,000, even if I give a range? Is there any negotiating room if they already said that and they realize that they're low?
I think you're assuming that they're serious about that first conversation. And you can say, look, let's know up front, because we don't want to waste each other's time. If you're telling me that if I walked on water and came in here and brought every single thing that they needed, that it is impossible for you to do anything better than that, then I need a little bit of time to think if I accept that for this company. But I don't even know. See, this is the thing. It's negotiating without having each other talk about the value, because they have to demonstrate the value to you. Because you might say, look, if I really like the people, and remember I said, you got to know your runway, you got to know your number. And if you sit there and go, I really want 300, but if this is a great company and I get to travel, or I don't have to travel, if it's got other things to it, then maybe the 250 is good, right? So in other words, I think we get too hung up on the number's the number. There's a lot, if anybody is going to be on Zoom call tonight, there's twice a year that I get really serious about making people think about what's important to them and what to value. And it's in the summer, because this is when we create our biggest memories, is in the summer. We choose to do that. And at holidays time, right? So, when it comes down to it, I don't know if any of you happen to see a post, but it happened to be a New York attorney who just left Gibbs and Dunn, which is a pretty big, is it Gibbs and Dunn? Gibson and Dunn, Gibbs and Dunn might be a country western thing. It's a law, big law firm. And he just wrote a freedom de facto, I don't know, a thing. And he said when he was a little boy, he'd drive up and down, the street. I
saw the post.
You saw it, right?
Yep.
You know what? All that money in the world, living in a sleeping bag on your office floor, and your kids are home, you never see them and put them to bed. Is that worth 50 grand? Come on. So you got to know your number, and you got to make it not only about the number. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good question though, David, and the way you posed it, really good. Anybody else?
Yes, I have a question. My compensation is like sales. It's a fairly high base, and then this very complicated formula of this for this and this for that, et cetera. Do you usually write that down or talk them through it first?
Oh, I would say I wouldn't give them a lot of detail. Don't get in, I'm looking for this on a base. And right now I have a very complex, because you don't want to keep when you're in sales, any sales leader who creates are you in sales, Adele?
No, I'm a lawyer, but I do very complex, big.
Okay. Yeah, I forgot that. That's right. I think that you want to get more simplicity, right? Wouldn't you like that? Right. So say, I kind of have a complex situation right now. I'm looking to simplify it, and let's keep talking, right?
Okay.
Because as a sales leader, I knew I had a problem. If I could say to my salespeople, if you close that deal, how much money will you make? If they couldn't answer that question, I was not doing my job as a sales leader, because they should know what money they were going to get from closing that deal.
Okay. And then I like to get more than an annual payment because these are very big numbers. How do you address that where you make it attractive to them as well?
That's that kind of a situation is very, especially in a law firm, it's very dependent upon the norm. So there's more people paying attention to who's getting a different deal than somebody else in law firms, and right.
Yeah.
So they may not, where I said I can't imagine the constraints,
Right.
that using that term and saying you may have your hands tied because that you don't have the flexibility to have a differing structure, but so it's put it out there, and all of a sudden I'm just telling you, you're going to get something better anyways, because they're going, well, at least she understands.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Reasonable. Remember I said before, like, you want to be known as the reasonable person, not the difficult person.
Right. Okay.
Enrique?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the series here. This is a question specific to New York. So nowadays the job listings have a range. So how does that information put out there factor in this discussion that we just went through? I mean, is it a case where, okay, if I'm above the range, forget it, I'm not even going to bother? Or
No, that's their target range. And by the way, the minute you create a rule, you have a rule about age discrimination, they find a way around it. You have there are all kinds of ways around. And what companies are doing now, I saw one, it was something like, because they have to give a range and they have to say, and it was something like 100,000 to 500,000. I'm not kidding. It was something that crazy. So there's a lot of, what do I say about that? How they do anything is how they do everything. Who would want to work for a company that wants to play that game with the commodity that, with the important thing about hiring people? So that would make me not apply. But if you are, again, we'll use the 200 to 250 range and you're thinking 275, that wouldn't mean that they're just telling you this is where we're targeting. And again, there's like the person that I think I just mentioned got this really, that she's moving to from Atlanta to St. Cloud, Minnesota, which means she's got to stock up on winter clothes anyway, so they gave her a nice bonus. But the ultimate finish on that was much higher than they had originally thought. And guess what? She's a former colonel in the military, in the Army, and this is an ops position, and it's construction. She couldn't be better. She was built for this role, right? Once they met her, they were going to give her what she wanted.
okay, thank you. Yep.
That's it. This, I can't, I think we think about the biggest message to give you tonight is don't think about the process as interviewing, negotiations. It's all negotiations. It's all about establishing your value. And if you don't structure it that way and think of it that way and saying, because then you get to the end of the road and you can say, well, we've talked a lot. And as you understand the problem that you need to solve, I've already solved. I've solved it twice. I can come here and solve it for you, but this is where we need to be. You've made them feel the pain. You've had them feel like, if you walk into the dentist, I can make that toothache go away. Yes, get me in the chair. Let's do it. Right? That's the way you want to be thinking about. Yeah.
Great. Well, on that happy note, maybe this is a good time to close it out, but I want to thank Pat. This is amazing to have you and such a prestigious speaker come to this group, which is a great group of people. And please keep in mind Pat's membership service, because I think it's well worth it.
It's so much. I'm so loving it. And when you get it, there's a lot of elements to it that it did take 2 years just to design it. But I'll get you you'll see all the elements of it, but it's been very effective for everybody so far. And what I wanted to do was reach a lot more people in a very, very affordable way. And I wanted to get people to, like, Zoom call is great. And I put out a lot of great information, but I wanted to be there to hold people accountable and to make sure that there was follow through and that you actually did the work, so you got the results. So that's really the big difference between that. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening. Take care. I'll see you again soon, I hope. Take care.